Hi everybody, my name is Kristen Zornada. I'm not Palestinian, I'm Italian Australian, and for that reason, can I please ask this lady over here who's holding a sign that says the rule of Banana over here, would you mind coming and sitting in front here? Because this is a really important message that's going to be relevant in my speech later on, and I want to highlight this.
Go Irene! Go Irene!
It's an honour to have been asked to speak here today, because I've been involved in the Palestinian cause in Australia, the US and Italy for nearly 10 years now. And I could tell you about myself, but I think an easy way to do that is to tell you the answers I give when Zionists question my intentions. I say Israel is violating international law, and they say go educate yourself. I say I'm an international lawyer. They say, why don't you get your head out of the books and go to Israel and Palestine and see for yourself? I say, yeah, I did that when I was at law school. And they say, oh yeah? What two-bit law school gave you a law degree? And I say, Harvard. I'm going to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today. And I'll pay my respects to their elders past and present by fighting for the recognition of the genocide against Indigenous peoples here and in Palestine. And I'll extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today by promising you this is not just about Palestine. We are going to hold our own government to account for what they did to your people in the same way we do to Palestine. We are going to fight to recognise genocide all over the world. And while some of us today, yes, may be Palestinian and Indigenous to the land of Palestine, all of us here today are somehow benefiting from the violent dispossession of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from their lands. So if we fight for ourselves, we too must fight for First Nations people in Australia. When people find out that I'm an international lawyer, they say to me, well, what's the point of international law, Kristen, if it can't stop a genocide? And I'm going to come back to that question later, if I can stop my notes from flying away. But I want to start by saying this. If international law is so useless, if it's toothless, if it's non-binding, why is Israel so scared of it? Why does Israel work so hard to discredit international law? Why did the head of the Mossad spend 5 years and millions of dollars intimidating the ICC prosecutor to drop its investigation into Israel? If Israel really thinks the ICJ is anti-Semitic and it won't get a fair hearing, then why not send the legal team to The Hague? And I will say on the outside it might look like Israel doesn't care about international law because they certainly don't respect it. But I can tell you on the inside, in the legal world, they care about it very much. They dedicate a lot of effort to shaping it. I should know. I took international law at Harvard. And do you know who my professor was? Former senior legal advisor to the IDF. I was at Harvard for 9 months, and in that time we had 3 different visits from Israeli propaganda groups. I remember I attended the first one because I wanted to hear what it was about. It was given by a guy called Captain Ben. When he opened his mouth to talk, I nearly fell off my chair. That was the crime. Because he had an Australian accent. Now, I probably should have just stayed down there because the next thing he said that made me laugh was that the IDF complies with international law. He said each of our soldiers is given a card with these rules of engagement, and he pulled out the card and he held it up, but he passed it around. So when it came time for questions, I raised my hand. I said, hi, excuse me, are you Australian? And he said, yeah, I'm from Bondi. Now, at the time, I was living in Cox Point. So this made me mad because I did not work my butt off to get into the top university in the world, only to be told bullshit from a guy from down the road. If I wanted a dude from my neighbourhood to like me, I would have gone on Tinder. So I said, okay, Ben from Bondi, you said your officers have that card, huh? He said, yes. I said, that card, really? I said, yes. So that one right there, he said, yes. And people started to get agitated. They said, Kristen, he asked the question, move on. I said, okay. So if it's that card right there, the one that you're holding up, why is it in English? He said, what? I said, your soldiers. Do they speak Hebrew? Why is the card in English? Who's that for? He said, let's move on, we're running out of time. Yes, you are running out of time. People like Captain Ben are soldiers, but not on the ground. Israel is engaged in a campaign of warfare. And warfare, in simple terms, is the de-legitimization of international law and the misappropriation and mischaracterization of it to suit political goals. Israel has a three-pronged strategy based on what I've observed in my 10 years. Misappropriate, mischaracterize, delegitimize. Misappropriate, mischaracterize, delegitimize. So first, I've told you about how they misappropriate international law. Here are some common talking points, and I'll tell you what my response is. So next time someone tries to get an interview with these, you can tell them that a Harvard lawyer told you they were wrong. Israel has a right to exist. Well, actually, no state has a right to exist. International law does not acknowledge the right of states to exist. Do you know what it does acknowledge the right of to exist? People. Jewish people are indigenous to the land of Israel and have a right to self-determination. Self-determination under international law gives you the right to a nation, not a state. A nation is a group of people who self-govern within a territory. A state is an administrative arrangement. It's just paperwork. So even if Jewish people are indigenous to the Middle East, let's not fight over whether they are or not. If I hear about the Kenites one more time to justify genocide, I'm going to be sick. It doesn't matter. It matters who is here now. You have a right to a nation. Jewish people have a right to a Jewish nation in Israel. They do not have the right to the state of Israel. They do not have the right to the Jewish state. Israel has a right to defend itself. Yeah, this is the part they always leave out. This comes from Article 2 of the UN Charter. And it says, against other states, not against territories you occupy. And you know what says that? This is not a pure principle. It's in the 4th Geneva Convention. And the ICJ already said in its royal opinion 20 years ago, apartheid is not self-defense. Let's look at how Israel mischaracterizes international law. This is the second part of their strategy. Israel talks of concepts like preemptive self-defense, human shields, security control. Terrorists hiding in hospital means that we can target them. Let me tell you as an international lawyer, this is all bullshit. Preemptive self-defense, that's called aggression. Security control is occupation. Human shield is not a legal status. There's civilians and there's combatants, and those are civilians. And terrorists allegedly hiding in hospital doesn't mean that the object loses protection from attack. If the hospital is still serving civilians, it is protected. And third and finally, Israel's delegitimization strategy is delegitimizing international law. And it goes something like this. International law isn't real. If it is real, it doesn't apply to us. If it does apply to us, it applies how we say. And if it doesn't apply how we say, then we haven't violated it. And if we have violated it, too bad, you can't stop us anyway. So let's return to this question, why is Israel so scared of international law? If we look at the most recent ICJ judgment, we can say at least three things. First, this judgment it levels the playing field for Palestinians. So in the response to the judgment, the Foreign Office of Israel has said that this judgment stands in the way of negotiations between the parties. That's not true at all. Court proceedings and negotiations work together. Most courts actually insist you have negotiations and mediations before you hear a case. They don't get involved in the negotiations, but the law still has an important role to play. The purpose of the law is to clarify realistic expectations for the parties. So if you don't like what they're offering, you can say, we'll go take our chances in court. But you can't do that unless you have a benchmark. And before, there wasn't one. And now, there is. And guess what? It's come out in favour of what the Palestinians have been saying all along. the playing field for Palestinians. Earlier, someone in one of their speeches cited Martin Luther King Jr., and I will again, in his letters from Birmingham jail. He says the purpose of non-violence is to create a situation so crisis-tracked that it forces the oppressor to the table on just terms. And this is what it does. Not like the Oslo Accords, which is someone taking your house and offering you a room in it and then charging you rent. And being like, why won't you take my deal? So Israel says the Palestinians don't want peace. Israel isn't offering peace to the Palestinians. It's offering pieces. Second, this judgment challenges the myth that the US and Israel are unstoppable. So when Israel says that judgments are not binding, not enforceable, that's to convince you that they are unstoppable. It is the same reason that the Hutus walk past UN peacekeepers to kill Tutsis. It is why Republika Srpska forces committed a massacre in a UN safe zone. It's not to show the UN they're useless. I've worked for the UN. Trust me, we know. It is to show their victims. See? No one cares about you. No one is coming to save you. No one can stop us. No international organisation will hold us to account. And that's what they mean when they say this judgment isn't enforceable. But we don't need a court to enforce the judgment. Courts don't enforce judgments. That's the point of the separation of powers. We enforce judgments. So when the world looks to the UN and says, why are we stopping a genocide? We should be asking, why aren't we? And this brings me to my final point about why Israel fears international law, and that is because, pure and simply, it supports Palestinian statehood. This ICJ case was instigated by the Palestinian Authority. Palestine has now been recognised in some capacity as a state by the UN, the ICJ, the ICC, and many countries worldwide. States are made by international law, and international law is making Palestine. And you might say, what about the genocide? The value of international legal judgments, just like it is with treaties, is that it sets expectations as to what should be reflected in domestic law. So just like how we have to implement treaty obligations in our domestic law, we can implement the consequences of international judgments in our domestic law. Yes, there are UN sanctions, but the part they never tell you about is that we also have autonomous sanctions. Australia has an autonomous sanctions regime, and they don't like to use it if it makes them look political. But one thing that makes clear that something is not political is that it has been decided upon by a court of justice, and that's exactly what happened. So we call upon Australia, sanction Israel. Not individual settlers in the West Bank. Israel. Sanction Israel. Boycott divestment sanctions that Palestinians have been demanding for decades. And we can do more than that. I told you before that I'm Italian Australian. You know what my comrades are doing in Genoa? They're refusing to load Israeli weapons onto ships. And we're sitting around here going, Alpha, please save us. Okay, I'll tell you what. The Italians didn't vote out Mussolini. There are other ways around the electoral politics. Okay? It just requires having a radical imagination. Pressure works. And Israel, I would tell you, Israel is scared of sanctions, because sanctions will make Israel a pariah state just like Iran. And that's all Israel has left at this point. It doesn't have support. It doesn't have the law. As we saw in Netanyahu's address to US Congress, the only thing that Israel can say right now is, well, we're not Iran. As if that's the standard. So I want to conclude by talking briefly about why I'm personally here today, because yes, I am a lawyer, but I'm also a person. And my mother's side is from southern Italy. Is there anyone here who's Italian or Italian-Australian? Okay, if I was doing this in Adelaide, it would be all of you, which is where I'm from, but alright. So Italy was formed after a violent war of unification, and you can tell me if it starts to sound familiar. Southern Italians were internally colonized. They stole our bread, our money, our sons, and when we rebelled, they sent the army in. They put a third of the southern Italian population in prison, and when the peasants rose up, they sent in elite forces that became the mafia to crush our peasant uprisings, to crush our demands for land. And after all this, the north of Italy has the nerve to turn around and say, why is the south so criminal? And they sent their scientists to study us. And Cesare Lombroso, he studied Italian prisoners, and he said, I know why they're so criminal. They come from a criminal race. They were born criminal, just like the Arabs. Oh, vergogna, exactly. And he told his colleagues, Cesare Lombroso from the north of Italy, he said, after my studies of Southern Italians, I can identify criminals. You can tell if they have dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin, tattoos, they speak in slang. He was just describing a typical Southern Italian and half the people here. His racist logic was brought up wholesale by the British and other colonizing forces. It informed the Nazis and racial profiling in the US today. His logic is the reason there are so many cops standing here today. Italian Australians know what I'm saying is true, and if you're not Italian Australian, then ask them. They pushed us out. The government paid Australia to take us. And our cities in south of Italy were left empty, and they stole our land. They sold it off, they polluted it, they gave it to the mafia and to northern companies. And now, they're selling off our empty homes to rich Americans for $1 each, just like they sell land in the West Bank to Zionist Americans in Los Angeles. So if you notice how I'm dressed today, I'm wearing a red shirt, and that is because the red shirt in Italy is a symbol of Garibaldi, it is a symbol of rebellion, it's a symbol of revolution, of pushing out foreign invaders. Southern Italy is a story of Palestine. Palestine is a story of Southern Italy. And I want to tell you here, do not believe that because our Prime Minister has an Italian surname that Italy is against Palestine, because this lady right here, Francesca Albanese, that is a real Italian. There are Italian politicians in Milan right now who have hung the Palestinian flag from the Duomo. They're refusing to send weapons, and there is an Italian song called Rossa Palestina, or Red Palestine. It was written in 1972, and I'm going to share the lyrics in English because this song could have been written today. Here's just some of them. The newspapers call the Palestinians terrorists. They're the same ones that call our partisans killers. We don't believe that Israeli propaganda or the traitorous Arab tyrants who portray the Palestinians at every turn. They keep telling us it's over, it's done in Palestine. But here we are still singing this same song. Because beyond the sea, there's a fraternal struggle. Every shot fired at a Zionist enemy will hit those who oppress us in Italy. And with the revolt of the people today, we move history forward. Revolution until victory. There's an Italian tradition of organizing politically in the piazza. And there is a famous Italian journalist, and he wrote a book on the mafia. And he's now living under 24-hour protection because he went to the piazza in Naples and he named the names of the people who are behind the mafia. Because the mafia, like Israel, they don't care if you talk about them generally, they hate when you talk in specifics. So you want to talk about the Australian legal profession, I can tell you why the Australian legal profession is so silent on Palestine. It's Mark Liebler. Mark Liebler was the president of the Australian Zionist Federation for 10 years. Mark Liebler is the one who organised 6 Australian Prime Ministers to come out and condemn Hamas and support Israel. This is the reason at the moment he is meeting with the president of Israel, while at the same time the university that he sits on the border is trying to kick out pro-Palestinian students. They won't tell you that, but I will name names. Speaking of naming names, Anthony Albanese. You tried up our name, but you're only Italian at election time, just like Joe Hockey was only Palestinian at election time. So we can say the same thing about Anthony Albanese and Joe Hockey that Kendrick said about Drake.
Like us. They're not like us. They're not like us.
So, Anthony Albanese, I have a message for you. There are 1 million Italian Australians in this country. There are 1 million Australians of the United States.
Now, I might be a lawyer who's bad at math, but even I know that's 2 million. We're nearly 10% of the population, so listen to us. And the first thing we say is free Palestine. And the second thing we say is, for the love of God, Australia, stop putting chocolate in your hummus and cream in your carbonara. And this is for Netanyahu, who says, for all we know, these protesters are funded by Iran. Let me be the first to say, fuck the Iranian regime, fuck the Israeli regime. עדיין בואו לפלסטין, עדיין בואו לאיראן. הלכו לפלסטין, free Palestine, liberal Palestina. We do not stand for oppressive regimes anywhere. This is one struggle. And so to anyone across the Ummah, to anyone, any Italian Australian who doesn't support Palestine, I'll say this, motherfucker. And Anthony Albanese, you're not a colleague, you're a fucking colonizer. Free